your ability to embrace discomfort is directly proportional to the level of success, happiness, and fulfillment and joy you're going to experience in life. The most powerful influences is who we get to expose ourselves to. And in that moment, I said, Mike, I just want to, it was like a fire. I just cozied up to him and said, I want more of that life. That just fueled me in a way that nothing ever had before. Struggle is the forge of strength. That pain is where power is created. And to be grateful for these struggles that we had was one of the biggest mindset shifts in my own life.
All right. So my guest today is Chris, the founder of Ascent Empowerment. It'd be cool if I could read. Coaching, passionate advocate for personal and professional growth with a background in Ivy League educated professor of student success, Himalayan mountain guide, and corporate trainer. Chris has spent years studying psychology, peak performance, and helping others overcome fear and achieve success, which obviously makes sense if you're climbing freaking mountains. With that being said, he spent some time meditating with monks in the Himalayas, which I can't wait to talk about, and developed a simple, repeatable system to help men shed false identities, overcome limitations, and live passion and joy. You have a wealth of experience. You're a transformation coach. Anyway, I want to start with this. Thank you for being on the podcast. I'm really excited for this one.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited for this opportunity and to meet you and talk with some other coaches and hopefully inspire some other folks to get out there and change lives.
So the first thing I want to ask you about, because obviously I've read this on your bio and I was like, I got to learn more about this. We start with the monk thing? Okay, first of all, who decides to go hang out with monks? That's number one. Number two, what was that experience like? And I guess number three, on the personal growth side, because I would imagine, right, a lot of what you train others to do was probably a journey of your own, and then you hit a certain level, right, and you're like, oh, I want to give this back. So what were some of the key insights from that trip to the Himalayas?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And as my very first trip to the Himalaya absolutely changed my life. I went at age 22 with my best friend growing up, and we'd always done outdoor adventures. And I'll never forget, I could say the exact memory. I'm sitting on the couch senior year in my apartment, and Dave's like, dude, let's go to the Himalaya. And that's just smoke shot out of my brain. And that first experience at age 22, I ended up spending 4 months between India and Nepal climbing, doing multiple peaks. That just blew my mind and sent my whole arc of my life in a totally different direction. Heading into that, I thought I was going to be an investment banker, and I was studying finance and history. And that's what my undergraduate degree is. And I grew up in a suburb of Manhattan, basically where half the parents commuted into Manhattan. And so I had this really kind of narrow worldview of what my life was, what was possible for life, and how one could orient one's life. And that trip blew my mind in 100 different ways. But one of the seeds that got planted that didn't mature for years later is those solar projects you were mentioning. And I wound up organizing 3 different solar projects in India and in Tibet, throughout that whole region. And so one of them was at a village medical clinic, one was at a school, and then we actually did 2 monasteries. So where that seed got planted, though, with groups of volunteers, is through the college, so through our global studies program. So get a group of volunteers together, go over there and, make some change. And it got started because on the very first trip, I wound up literally on a climber's message board. I met this guy named Mike Sullivan. It was at the Himalayan Explorers Club in Kathmandu. And Dave and I were, a little intimidated by the first peaks in Nepal, and we wanted a third partner. And there was Mike Sullivan's note. And he was a Los Alamos nuclear engineer. His job had literally been designing underground nuclear detonation, the sensors that would measure the yield and megatonnage. And then he had a total life turnaround and said, that's not how I want to spend my life. He committed his life to solar. And he was spending a year traveling through Tibet and Nepal and South Asia, climbing peaks. But the original start of the trip was him doing a solar project for these monks in Western Tibet at a monastery at 18,000 feet, which is the largest year-round, one of the highest, I should say, highest year-round inhabitations in the world. And so I wound up spending 2 months in a tent with Mike. And here was this 36-year-old swashbuckling, gravel chewing, fire breathing guy who was just living life large. And there was this young 22-year-old thinking I'm going to be an investment banker. And I'm like, whoa, what life could be. And I sat there just listening to Mike's stories and the adventure and the passion with which he lived his life. And he became a mentor of mine, and he was one of my dearest, closest friends up until he passed. And that his thumbprints on my life forever changed the arc. And I realized through that journey too, the power that we have over other people, and how the most powerful influences is who we get to expose ourselves to. And in that moment, I said, Mike, I just want to, like, it was like a fire. I just like cozied up to him and said, I want more of that life. That just fueled me in a way that nothing ever had before. And so I planted that seed and said, Mike, I need to do a solar project with you. I want to live with the monks. I want to be a part of this. I don't know anything about solar, but that seed was planted. And then life kind of took different directions. And I wound up, long story short, doing a whole bunch of other stuff. And for 10 years, that dream kind of simmered in the background until one day Mike was down visiting me here in Colorado, and we're backcountry skiing, climbing up this mountain to go ski down it. And I was like, wait a minute, Mike, like, we can do this through the college, where I was a professor. I was an assistant professor, I was a young professor there. And I was like, we can, nobody had ever done that. Like, we do like these like typical study abroad trips, go to Germany and go look at like churches. And I'm like, why not? Let's go to Tibet. And so we got involved with this NGO called the Tibetan Village Project, it's based out of Boulder, Colorado, by this Tibetan refugee who was hand selected by the Dalai Lama to go to the United States. And so with Tomden's help, we were able then to, that's where we did the first village medical clinic in the Kham region, which is far western China, eastern Tibet. And that's where then we did that in 2012. And that was just this mind expanding experience to finally not just go there as a climber, but to go to give and to serve. And so we got this group of volunteers together, and we lived in a monastery up above the village medical clinic. And it was a remote place. Like, we flew into Chengdu, China, which is where the iPads come from. And at I forget, it's like 2,000 feet or something, pretty low elevation. You literally just drive uphill for days up to the Tibetan plateau. And there we were living with the monks, and it was a monastic training center. So there were all these little kids who were like monks in training. We called them mini monks. And they were so cute. Like, they were doing the mantras and the meditations, and they're dressed in the robes, and they're just smiling from ear to ear. And this is a place that foreigners don't go. There's no electricity, no running water. And we got just to be immersed in their world and help. It was actually a nun who was a nurse at the clinic. She ran it, and she was literally trained as a Western nurse. She went down to Chengdu and got that. And she was also trained in Tibetan medicine, to very traditional, like, herbs. And, to me, it looks like potions and tonics and cauldrons. But, that's, little did I know at the time, understand how Tibetan and Chinese medicine worked. It was such an education. And literally, you walked into her office, and one wall was all like gauze and syringes, and the other wall was all like roots and Chinese medicine, and the forks and the road right there. And so just being immersed in that experience lit me up. And so we wound up doing projects every other year. And so then we did a monastery which was perched on the side of one of the four sacred peaks of Tibet. Tibet is, Mount Kailash is the most famous of the four sacred peaks, but sort of like the Navajo Nation, which I live next to, is defined by four sacred peaks. So is Tibet. Those are the historic geographic boundaries. And there was one called Minyagankar, which is a 25,000-foot mountain. And there's an ancient 900-year-old monastery perched literally on the side of the peak at like 14,000 feet. And Tom said, these guys need help too. So then we did another project for there, and we had to literally horse pack in all the supplies because there was no even road to this monastery. It was so remote. And to do a 2-day hike from the closest road where you get like an overland 4x4 kind of vehicle to. And there we lived with those monks, and that was one of the most eye-opening. Like, literally, I'm looking at my background is Wangchu, one of the monks that I spent time with. And the guy just didn't speak a word of English. I don't know any Tibetan. I mean, Mike got pretty proficient. He spent several years of his life, actually, over multiple trips over there. But just, the way his presence and the way he carried himself, and you looked into his eyes and you just felt that this person radiated a sense of inner peace that I've only ever felt when I actually got to meet the Dalai Lama. That same feeling where just like, the Dalai Lama walked into the room and like my skin stood up and I was like, there's something different about that. And when I saw the Pope, I didn't meet him, but I felt the same thing, radiating from a distance, that there's something certain humans just have they figured something out. And it's a very interesting energy. So anyway, long story short, every day I'm there meditating. I committed. I was like, I'm going to live the monastic life with these guys. So every morning I'd go to the prayer room and do the pujas with them and do my best to kind of follow along. And then every evening, a couple hours of meditation at a time, and just be immersed in their world while we're building the solar array, the panels, the batteries, wiring the whole monastery because they wanted lights. And that was the thing that they want. So simple, because they were literally having to read all their scrolls, the prayers off of kerosene lamps. And their biggest worry was burning down the monastery.
Mm.
And when we first lit up the monastery, here's this thing covered in scrolls and tapestries and thangkas, these beautiful, intricate Buddhist paintings. And then he almost cried. I mean, it was so powerful for him to actually see this ancient art that was so dingy and dark because they didn't have a lot of windows. And that just lit me up. And I was like, this is what I want to keep doing. And we kept doing those projects until, unfortunately, Mike passed in a mountaineering accident. We did the final project up in Ladakh, up in India, in his honor. So that was an amazing, chapter of my life, to be a part of that and be immersed in that world.
Was that the start, would you say, of you wanting to become a coach and bring, I guess, that inner peace to other people? Like, well, I guess, what was your transformation like while you were there? I know you said like it lit you up, but like, what were you going through before versus after? Because it sounded like you found something that maybe probably was always within you, but it got unlocked there, and then you were like, hey, I want to give this to other people. Is that fair, or is that like, was there more to it?
It was an evolution of that. Like that spark first got lit in me, actually right before I went on that first trip to the Himalaya. So there I was. I'm graduating from Claremont McKenna, this very finance-oriented college, with a degree in economics, and my focus was I'm going to go be an investment banker, and I'm going to do this whole track. And I was like, but before I do that, like, because I planned with Dave to go to the Himalaya, and I was like, well, I can't go interview now, so I can't start a job for the summer and then, take off 4 months. So I was sitting there in the college, or what do you call it, like career center, and I found this little tome hidden at the bottom. It said "Summer Jobs That Are Adventures," and that thing just called
Mm.
me forward. And I opened it up, and it was like this golden book, like radiating my face. And in there, I found an opening for Outward Bound to be a mountaineering instructor to teach for the Colorado Outward Bound School, and I was like, that's what I want to do with my summer after graduating. And so I flew out to Colorado, and I was the
Have you
first, I'm
done
first
mountaineering
generation.
before this?
I'd spent a summer in the national park. I was a rock climber ever since high school.
Mm.
And I'd spent a summer with the National Park Service up in Olympic National Park working as a volunteer climbing ranger. So that's where I'd first stepped on a glacier, learned an ice axe, and mentored under the guy who literally held Stefan Lufgren, who had the speed record on Rainier. So this really incredible, just fire breathing human. So anyhow, I was like, I'm gonna go work for Outward Bound. And here I am, this first generation college student. Like, my parents, both are immigrants. And within 24 hours of graduating, this big moment, I flew to Colorado and had to race up to 12,000 feet with an ice axe in my hand to rejoin the new staff training. So it's already a day late, but I'm like, I'm not missing graduation.
Hmm.
And so that summer with Outward Bound, I got involved with transformational work. And, I came there, I thought I just wanted to climb mountains. Like, oh yeah, I was like, what job can I climb the most? Sweet, Outward Bound, done. And little did I realize what a transformative experience it was for people to be ripped out of their everyday lives, slap a backpack on them, head into the mountains. And some of those courses were 30 days long. We're like literally 30 days straight. You were not in a vehicle. You did not, we would literally hike down to a trailhead where we could get like a high clearance 4-wheel drive vehicle up and then throw more food in our backpacks out of the truck and then head right back into the mountains. And the fears that people encounter in the mountains are so visceral. Like in
Mm.
life, a challenge feels pretty abstract most of the time, but when you're perched on the side of a peak and falling and you're looking down, that feels really real. And I got to figure out how those ropes and the knots and the crampons and the ice axe, all that stuff work. It suddenly becomes the fears and the limiting beliefs And I would see people shut down out of fear more than anything else, which is a whole story I tell in my TED talk. And I saw that that's the thing that holds us back the most. It's not the physical fitness. I would see these beasts of human beings who are so strong crumble in the face of that challenge. And I see people who weren't that physically strong, not that fit, but just tough as nails mentally with ironclad mindset, be the ones who were the most successful. And that's what lit me up. And I saw people come down from those mountains totally transformed. They were literally different people. And the same thing happened to me at the end of that summer when I came down from the mountains. When I head into that experience, to be honest, like I didn't really like myself. I didn't even know it. I just thought this is how life feels. Like I had this amazingly toxic critical inner voice and a lot of, negative thinking. And, I was oscillating between, feeling good and feeling bad. But a lot of the time I just felt kind of mad most of the time. And I didn't know what self-love was. I didn't really like the man I saw in the mirror. And a lot of days didn't even really respect him all that much. And in Outward Bound was in the mountains. There was the first time I confronted my own limiting beliefs. I confronted my self-image and I felt alive and free and lit up and connected to a community of like-minded people for the first time. And I came into my own on this whole different level, like a moth coming out of the cocoon. And that was the same transformation that the students were having. We were doing it together. And that just like changed the whole arc of my life. And I said, like, forget, being a wolf on Wall Street. This is what I want to do. Like, this lights me up. But I didn't really, understand the path fully then. So it was like, an evolution of it. I thought it was going to be in the mountains. And so I tried that. I lived in my car and I ski patrolled all winter and I would guide all summer in the mountains. And, I thought that was the path and it really wasn't. So that was an evolution before I reached the college, before I really realized that life isn't lived in the mountains, that I was in a way I was escaping from life, that life is
Mm.
lived in the valleys. And just as, there's so many ways we used to numb and escape our emotions and the realities of life. I was using the outdoors as a way to prop up my emotional state, to feel good, to feel free, to feel alive. But when I get back in the valleys, everyday life would kind of crash in on me and I'd start planning the next trip. When I get back in the mountains, when I get back in the mountains. And it was just another way of numbing and voiding and escapism. It was a healthy one, but like, I realized I can't live my whole life in a Subaru. So I said,
Well,
well, how do I
probably too,
get,
like,
yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think probably it gave you an insight of how to deal with those things, and then over time, right, you develop the strategy to deal with those things in the valleys, as you say, right? Like, cause I think about it, like it's not the same, but I look at it from the perspective of like doing a cold plunge. Like I read somewhere somebody said something once, and it wasn't directly at me, but I said because I do jujitsu and I do a cold plunge, and this guy says, well, doing the cold plunge and jujitsu won't make you a successful business owner. And I go, well, actually, I would argue that yeah, it actually does more than you think, because while I'm in that cold plunge, you're dealing with those inner demons that you tend to avoid, right? Like the moment you get into that cold plunge, you're thinking, I want to get the fuck out. It's cold. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing that? But then you learn how to manage that. And then when you get into business and you're afraid and you're like, I don't know if I could do this, you go, oh, I've experienced this before. Like, it's not that bad. And so I would imagine, again, mountaineering for you is probably the same thing. Like, if you have a very chaotic inner voice, you can't do the job that you need to do. So once you learn how to manage that, like I'm sure you've seen it, but was it the Alpinist on
The
Netflix?
Alpinist. Oh my God, that's
Oh my
incredible.
god! Like, watching that, I'm like, oh, those people. I can see why it's addicting for sure. But the other
Mm-hmm.
side of it, when they are talking, there's this monotone, like, yeah, nothing really. I almost fell off of a fucking cliff. Me worrying about X, Y, and Z is nothing. You know what I mean? Because it's perspective. And what's the saying? Like, the hardest thing you've ever been through is the hardest thing you've ever been through. Like, I think that probably helps give that perspective. So, again, I guess, like, my next question would be, again, how can you duplicate that without dragging someone to the mountain? Like, how can you give that same experience without giving them that? Like, let's face it, like you might die here without that experience. How do you give them that inner peace, I guess, that you experience?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And that's something that's been my 20-year journey, kind of unlocking within myself. And then now I turn around and I help other people on that same path. And it's a multifaceted answer. God, we could spend hours just going on that. But so I want to pick up several nuggets of what you said that are really profound, Raylan. And one is that, like that cold plunge, and it's the ability, one piece of this is the ability to embrace discomfort. And I tell my son, like, your ability to embrace discomfort is directly proportional to the level of success, happiness, and fulfillment and joy you're going to experience in life. Because so many times our natural instinct is to jump out of the water, like you say. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure as an MMA fighter, like, how much discomfort did you have to lean into and actively seek, right? I'm sure that was formative. That ring wasn't just a place where you forged the muscle, it's where you forged this thing, in your head, and that belief system that served you in your whole life, right? And what I came to see is at first I believed that could only happen in the mountains. But the mountains is just a forge, it's just a place to hone, but the metal is us. And there's lots of different ways to get at that. And what I came to discover in the end was that the outdoors is just a stimulus. It's just a multi-sensory experience. You experience it through, the wind on your face, and that sunset lights up, the optical nerve and all of that. But in the end, it's just lighting up different parts of your brain. And is that the only way to light up those parts of your brain? Is it the only places where you can embrace discomfort? No. And so that's then that question of how else do we teach this? Because that was the question I sat with as I sat in my Subaru. Like, can I get that same reward without having to live in this car?
Mm-hmm.
And that launched my roundabout journey. And I realized that I could, through other mediums, have this same transformative experience without having to drag people out of their lives, without having to say, look, just, put pause on your life for a month. Let's go ahead with me to the mountains, right? That's great.
Yeah.
Some people can do that, but that's not realistic for everyone. Nor was it for me. Like, I'm a father, like
Yeah.
that life, and I'm a husband, and I want to be down in the valley now, which was a huge shift versus, if you met 20, me, Chris in my 20s, where I was escaping as much as possible.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think, I guess the next part of this would be then, what process did you figure out for people? Like, what is your process to helping them get to that moment in their lives, like to find that joy? Because one of the things I liked about what you're doing is you're specifically helping men, and maybe this is a better place to start. Why men? Of all the people you could help, right? Why is it that men need this help from you the most? Because yesterday I had another podcast episode with a psychotherapist who's also working with men, and one of the things he said that I guess I didn't really realize until recently, which is odd, is how much men are in crisis today. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess what drew you to wanting to help men find that inner peace, to find joy in their lives, but also without I think in your website you said without sacrificing success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was I've worked with everybody, and that's one of the neat things about being at the college, and then when I did the corporate work, is the whole spectrum of humanity, and I loved that, and I loved the diversity. But I came to a point where I realized as I went into the online world, which is where I work now, that specialization is important. Those of you who are coaches out there, it's really important then to not be a generalist. That the more narrow you can be, the more specific you're targeting your language, the person that you help and serve, the more you cut through the noise. And so that advice was given to me. And then I sat there and said, well, who do I connect with the most? Who am I most impactful? And I've had, like Nancy is one of my favorite clients I've ever worked with, and totally transformed her life. She lost 100 pounds, changed her career, like massive, massive shifts. Like, I loved working with Nancy. I have not, but that was, I felt like there was just a little bit more I was drawn towards the men. It was my life experience, maybe because I'm a guy and I spent a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
around guys. I could just relate to it in a little bit of a different way. And there wasn't a space for men to do this. And as you say, like, men, we struggle. And the problem is we often don't express it. We're getting better about this, but especially my generation, men don't talk about their emotions. Men don't talk about their struggles. That's weakness, right?
Yeah.
And I saw that that was such an underserved need, is to help men step up and feel more powerful in their life, but not from a sense of like bravado or machismo, but for a sense of like authentic self-worth, where I have nothing to prove to anyone. I don't need to boast. I don't need to brag. That's true rock solid confidence, when you stand on your own 2 feet, regardless of who's around you and what is happening around you. And that's what I brought out in myself through this 20-year struggle, because I was crippled. I had crippling low self-confidence for most of my life. And I saw other guys and said, they need that too. And so I reached back, and essentially, if I'm really honest, Raylan, like I think most of the most successful coaches, we serve us. We're just
Mm-hmm.
serving the younger version of us. And I see that with some of my, my closest friends in the coaching world. Like Lydia Knight helps people with weight loss. She's one of the most powerful, dynamic weight loss coaches out there. And her mission is to end all eating disorder. I mean, what a huge mission. But it becomes because she was overweight herself, and she struggled, and she, lived that journey, and now finally has a healthy relationship with her own weight. And that's what I think makes Lydia so freaking powerful in that role. And so I look back and I say, well, I'm looking for just the younger versions of me who are wrestling with life, who didn't have a Mike Sullivan fall into their life and say, hey, kid, come under my wing and let me show you what's possible. And often these guys picked the safe path, and then now they're an engineer, they're in finance, and they got all the trappings, they got the nice car, the 401k and all that, but there's a piece of them that's playing small, and they're living for that weekend. They're not living a fulfilled life, and they know they're not showing up at the level that they want to, that's possible for them. And that was me. And so I just reach back and say, follow me, brother. Like, there's a better way.
Yeah, I think you're right in that the best coaches, or just I think entrepreneurs in general, find their purpose through their own pain. Which there's a great book called Built to Serve. I talk about it a lot by Evan Carmichael, but that's what he talks about, right? Is that your purpose usually comes from pain. Like again, for us, like at Elevated, like our overarching, because we have 3 parts of what we do. And the brand mission is to help people remove excuses and obstacles so they can realize they deserve more. And it's because in my own life, like when my father went away to prison, dealing with domestic violence, all this stuff, I was a victim in my life. So it became this mission of, most of the people that I talk to, in one way, shape, or form, they're a victim in their life. Whether it's like limiting beliefs, or it's like, hey, well, no one's, again, when it comes to, it's interesting because I think even the high level coaches and consultants that we work with at our agency, they've been doing it, Chris, for 30, 40 years. But the idea of sharing their wisdom online freaks them out. And so it's like even them, right? They created this victim mentality of, well, I can't do that. I can't do that because of ... right? And so it's interesting when you say that, because it's true, right? Like that's usually why it's one of my favorite questions to ask, whether it's the podcast or with clients, is like, talk to me about some of the most painful experiences you've been through. And then usually the most logical thing next is like, all right, well, if you were your own mentor at that time, what would you have done now, knowing what you know now, to get you out of that situation? And guess what? Boom, there's usually your offer. Because again, you can make an offer and make money. And that's the thing. You can make money selling whatever. But what's the fun in that? You know what I mean? Like, don't you want to, and I think that's what I love about what you talk about, is that inner fire, like that joy. Like, it is perfectly possible to make money doing something you love doing. Like it's perfectly possible. But here's the downside. And I think this is kind of what is, again, fascinating about you, is that it doesn't come easy. I mean, how many years were you spending, and how much time you're spending climbing freaking mountains to find the answer, right? Like, how long did it take you to figure out how you want to be represented online? These things don't happen overnight when it's meaningful, right? But you can find the easiest hack and go buy a fucking ATM or something, and that's how you make money. I don't know. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of
No,
fascinating.
I love what you're saying too, and that's so powerful. And my personal journey too, I used to feel bad about the challenges that I faced. I used to feel like that was a sign of my unworthiness, and that I wish these things hadn't happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the biggest shifts I help clients step into, is realizing that these struggles are how where strength is born. It's the forge, right? Imagine going into a gym and there were no weights.
Yeah.
We'd be like, I want my money back. Like, what the hell, right? I need something to resist. I need something to lift. I need something to push, to create this muscle. But we wish life was the opposite. We want things to be easy. And so, when we intuitively get that in the gym, we intuitively get that in the mountains. Like, it all becomes, well, what's the biggest mountain I can do? What's the hardest river I can run? What's the hardest rock garden I can sail my mountain bike through at the highest speed with the biggest grin on my face? But then we'd show up into work and it'd be like, ooh, the challenge shows up in my inbox. And we're like, and we just wish that challenge disappeared. And so helping people shift into that, like struggle is the forge of strength, that pain is where power is created. And to be grateful for these struggles that we had was one of the biggest mindset shifts in my own life. And is to really, even in the moment of the struggle, when the hell, the little shit's going down, to step back and be like, what could be awesome about this?
Mm.
Like that literally just happened to me on this most recent trip. So I was just in October, I was guiding a 2 peak trip over in Nepal. I still do one trip a year for fun, really, because I love to give back. Because, who would I be without the mentors like the Stefan and, this high school teacher I had who first taught me how to climb, Jin Dai, who changed my life. Without them, I wouldn't be here, right? So this is my way of paying back. But
Mm.
anyway, so like I'm guiding this 2 peak trip, and we're pushing up to like 14,000 feet. We're in this little village, and I got sick, like so sick, like literally, Raylan. I went from like standing, talking, teaching this like roped glacial travel class on dry dirt. 2 hours later, I'm in my sleeping bag with 103 fever and like full body shakes, like chills, like uncontrollable. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm the guide. Like, I'm running this trip. But I'm like, okay, I'll get better. Like this isn't the first time I gotten sick in Nepal. Like you spend enough time in that part of the world, it's par for the course. And literally the same village on the last trip in 2019, I got altitude issues. I had to wait for a couple of days while the group goes on. And so I was like, okay, I'll do that again. And so I'm sitting in my sleeping bag, and I'm, like I had like the bed sweats where like you
Yep.
literally you soak it to the bone, and like I could wring out my long underwear. And I'm like, cool, fever's broken. Chris is back, but I'm like, now I got these like GI issues, where I can't eat and I'm having kind of like, bowel issues and all that stuff. I'm like, okay, well, that's a normal thing here too. I just must have eaten something bad. And the group had gone on without me. And I reached the point where I was like, this is my last window to recatch the group because they're going to drop off this pass. And if I don't catch them now, my trip's over. And so like I'm sitting there in the seat back, I'm doing all my mindset work, and I'm like visualizing myself rejoining the group, and I'm visioning myself pushing onto the summit, and then I'm like summoning all this, all my strength and all my power, and I push my way up and I rejoin the group, and as I'm making it up to them, I'm like, whoa, I'm like really sick. Like something's wrong. I got to
Yeah,
take
that's impressive.
antibiotics.
You even caught up with them. Jesus, I would. Most
Yeah,
people would be like, "Yeah, I'm done."
No, I'm like, and I'm pushing ahead, man. Like I got iron in between, so I'm telling myself, right? Like I'm not a quitter, and I'm gonna, like, and then this was a peak that this trip, by the way, had been built up in my mind because for 3 years during COVID, I had expedition after expedition canceled. So I
Mm.
hadn't been in Himalaya since 2019, and that itch had grown, and I was like, finally, I'm here, I'm back, like game on. I'm not turning around, like like this isn't gonna stop me, and you don't know what I'm made of, and just standing in my power, and I'm going to find a way. That's just how I roll. And I'm able to rejoin the group at 19, and then at 19,000 feet, and then there's this moment of commitment where we're dropping into the Hongu Valley. I'm not able to push on to the summit. I'm like I'm not well enough for that, but I can do the rest of the trip, and I can do peak number 2. But we got to drop into this one of the rare uninhabited valleys of Nepal, and I'm taking antibiotics, and I'm starting to feel better, and I'm like, I think I got this. And as we drop down, we got to drop like 6,000 vertical feet to get down to the bottom of the valley and push our way back up. And it all hits me like a floodgate again, and all like the fatigue and the stomach issues, and I'm just like, oh my God. And now I'm committed to this like valley, and the only way out of this valley is over the pass that we're
Yeah, 'cause I
moving
imagine you can't
towards.
just stop.
Yeah, and so I kept pushing, right? I'm like, I'm gonna get better. I'm gonna get better. And then like I reached this point where really it's like, I'm not getting better. I'm getting worse. And I got so haggard that like I could barely walk at this point. And even the clients were like, dude, you're done.
Hmm.
I don't take, I don't turn around easy. And I had all this like guilt and responsibility, all like cocktail swirling within me because I'm the guide. Like I'm responsible for these people. I'm not going to abandon them in the trenches, and I'm not going to give up on this peak. But like I reached that point. We all have a breaking point. And that mind, you can have an ironclad mindset, but your body has a point at which you're done, right?
Hmm.
And I was at 16,500 feet at that point, and I'm like, I mean, it's it. It's called a helicopter. I'm out, and I thought it'd be so easy, because the helicopters, it's a big business now in the Everest region. There's like at least 6 heli operators flying in that area. And next morning I wake up and there is just, we're totally socked in the monsoonal clouds. And helicopters can't fly in that, right? Because they only can fly by a line of sight. They can't fly through clouds or mist. And it had been, I don't know if you've been following, but it had been a crazy monsoon season in the Himalaya. Like Pakistan had all that flooding. Like it was just like the whole trip, it was raining and just shitting on us the whole time. Like we had one bluebird day the whole trip. And I'm like, okay, well, tomorrow will be better. And so the group pushes on without me because I didn't want them to lose their whole timeline. And it's just this other client, Paul, who's this Irishman. He's sick too. He's got a GI issue. So Paul and I, we're hunkered down, and we call in the helicopter, and we can barely get a satellite signal out on our cell phone. That's how remote we are on the sat phone. And like that day, I'm just sitting in a tent all day, staring at the wall, waiting for the weather to break. Day two, still can't fly. Socked in, monsoon, whole day. It's raining. Helicopter can't fly. I'm staring at the tent wall and just spinning in my thoughts, just like still sick as a dog. Day three, I wake up. Now there's 8 inches of fresh snow on the ground. And I'm sitting there like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm sick as a dog. I'm not getting better. I haven't eaten now in like a week. Like, it would literally take me like an hour to eat just like a single packet of oatmeal. And my body is just shutting down. And like, I'll be honest, Raylan, like I was at my breaking point. Like I'm like shedding tears.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at my whole my life as I'm staring at this tent wall, like going like, what's going on? And we were committed. I really realized that like how deep in we were. Like I said, we could barely get a satellite signal out. I'm trying to coordinate the rescue with Global Rescue, the helicopter on a Garmin InReach, which is like old school flip phone text messaging, and it takes 10 minutes to get out a text message, and they can't fly. And I don't know when they're going to get me. And I'm sitting there like looking at Paul, like, how many more days are we going to be here? And it's like, we got to get out, brother. And at what point do we start hiking out? And the only way out is the way we came in over that 18,000 foot glacier covered pass. And then we have another 16,000 foot pass. It's a week hike just to get to the nearest medical center, which is like not a good medical center
Yeah.
in Lukla, just to be able to see a nurse. And that's a week when you're healthy. And I'm looking down and it's like, you're so dependent on modern Himalayan mountaineering, on helicopters for rescue, on the Sherpas for the support. Like I had a 70-pound duffel in a day pack. Like I didn't even have, I couldn't even carry all my gear, like in a little small day pack. I'd have to abandon all my gear. And even if I was well enough, there's no way I could carry all that gear out over that 18,000 foot pass on my own, because our Sherpa crew had gone on with the rest of the team, because we're assuming the helicopter is going to come get us like it normally would.
Mm-hmm.
And man, like that's not a good lens to be looking at life through. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking at Paul. I'm like, dude, if we were hiking out, we're doing this. Like I'm seeing my son again. I don't care if this is like a survival story.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're making this happen. And finally, day four cracks. And I wake up and the Garmin InReach, the satellite device, is going off. And I pick it up and it says, heli's coming in 10 minutes. And I poke my head out. And for the first time, I can see some blue.
Yeah.
And literally 10 minutes later, like that old TV show Airwolf, this helicopter comes ripping up, thundering up the valley, and it's this A-Star B3. It's like a $2.2 million helicopter. And there's this German pilot, and he's like, Schnell, Schnell, like, throw your shit in here, dude. We're flying. Like, this is my window. And we're like, ah, like, and we're piling in the helicopter. And I'm still sick as a dog, mind you. But I'm like euphoric. Like, I'm going to live. I'm getting to see my son again, and like, we're flying over that 20,000 foot pass we're supposed to climb to get out of there, like buzzing mountains, looking at Everest, with the IMAX view and the Lhotse Wall, and it's just this euphoric helicopter ride. And in that A-Star B3, that's the only helicopter that's actually landed on the summit of Mount Everest. This thing it's like a BMW M3 of helicopters. It is an amazing machine, and this pilot is going for it. These are the best pilots in the world, them and Air Zurich over in the Alps, are the two most technical flying that's done in the world. And this guy's like pulling G's and like going for it, because he's got to pick up a whole bunch of other sick people, because this is the first rescue window they've had in days to get all these people out of the Everest region, right? And I'm like, I've spent a lot of time on helicopters. One of the operations I guided for has a heli. So I spent a lot of time in and around them. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's going for it. Like, this is incredible. So I'm like euphoric, but sick as a dog. Anyway, wild story. They get me, they take us straight to Kathmandu, like ambulance waiting for us on the airstrip. They pile us all to the hospital. And the doctor's like, you got dengue fever. And I was like, what? Like dengue fever. Like, what's that? Like, I never even heard of it, right? Vaguely aware that this thing was going on. And I was sick as a dog and I was crushed and I wasn't going to get better. Like, there was no getting better from dengue as I sat in that tent, especially at altitude, your body doesn't heal. And then, I'm sitting there talking to the owner of the guide service, and she's like, I'm in this Kathmandu hospital, right? And she's like, we need to get to the United States to a real medical clinic, and I can get you out tomorrow morning on a plane, or I can get you out in 4 days. Those are the only flights that were available last minute. And I'm like Googling online about dengue, and there were 4 varieties of dengue fever going around. It's mosquito-borne illness. All the monsoonal rains had this huge
Mm.
outbreak in mosquitoes. So like Kathmandu is having a whole dengue outbreak. It had somehow missed the memo on. And there's 4 varieties of
That's how
dengue.
you got it, was from a mosquito.
I was bitten by a mosquito in Kathmandu. My trip was
Jesus.
over before it even started. And it has a week-long incubation period. So I was, like a walking I had it, but I didn't know.
Mm.
And then I'm reading online, like if you get bitten a second time from one of the three, from the three, there's 4 varieties, you're at high risk of severe dengue, which has a 1% mortality rate. So I'm like, hell no, like I'm getting out of here. And so I'm like, Laura, put me on the next plane. And so literally they're pulling the IVs out of me. They throw me into a taxi and I'm onto a plane, 36-hour flight home through Doha, through Qatar. And Raylan, the reason I tell the story is by the time I got home, I mean, I wasn't just like crushed, I was shattered. I mean, I was physically shattered. I hadn't eaten in a week. I was severely dehydrated. Like, I'd pushed myself so hard, believing that I would get better, not realizing I had dengue. There was no getting better from this. I thought it was a stomach bug. Like, they always pass. I was like emotionally shattered from the ride, from that the 3.5 days in the tent waiting for rescue, like wondering what the hell is going on with my life. And spiritually, they're just shattered in every way. And then you pile in all like the guilt, like abandoned. I was the guide. Like these
Mm.
people needed me. I mean, there's a Sherpa guide as well, but they don't speak English as well. And he's super technically competent. He'd summited Mount Everest and had done the peak. We were due there to do 30 different times. So technically, his skills were on another level. But like there's a whole other set of skills he doesn't bring, which is why they have a Western guide and why I'm the expedition leader. So I had all that piled in, and that shame and that guilt and all those negative emotions of like having given up on my dream. I didn't summit anything
Mm-hmm.
on that whole trip. And I looked around and I'm just physically crushed, emotionally crushed, spiritually crushed. And looking at all these pieces of my life, the shattered glass. And I was like, you know what? I got to put myself back together. And as I get to put myself back together, why not put back the pieces in a better way? Why reassemble the same me that I was before? Why not take this struggle and turn it into strength? Why not take this pain and turn it into power and learn something from this incredible gift of an experience, which is not the trip I wanted. I mean, I spent 30
Yeah.
years picturing myself standing on 2 different summits,
But possibly
helping
the,
our
the
whole
trip you
team.
needed.
Yeah, but it was the trip I needed. And I walked away with this gratitude for my health, gratitude for just my energy, like my vibrational energy, like, that we give off. If you don't have that, then what do you have? And so it wasn't the trip I wanted. It wasn't the trip I needed. It wasn't the experience I would ever willingly sign up for, but it was such a gift. And then I get to turn around and help my guys as they go through their struggles to put their lives back together when they get shattered.
Hmm.
It was such a gift.
Yeah, I think also like sometimes as a coach or even just as a guide, right? Like There's people that I know that have found success in their own way, and they almost forget about what it's like to be in that place. And it's like sometimes the universe, whatever, will bring you back to baseline. They'll bring you back to, hey, don't forget why you got started, right? Don't forget why you're doing this. Because again, it's like it's easy to, it's funny. Like even when I think about any trials or tribulations I've been through, really they eventually just become stories. They just become a memory, and you move past the emotion of it, and so it's easy to kind of like forget, like I mentioned. But when you go through an experience like that, like you really, I think it's a good way too to go, how effective is my strategies of putting your pieces back together? Like that is the time for you to really experience it and then go, no, my shit works still. I had to do it for myself and it still works.
Yeah, and what a great time for us to practice those tools and to dust off the whole. I mean, I had to go and do the whole toolbox and bust out some ones I hadn't even used in a while, and put in and to practice what I preach. And in doing so and visiting those tools from such a disempowered place gave me new insight in just how powerful they really are and how grateful I am to have spent 20 years developing this toolbox and doing this inner journey.
So then what do you think, okay, so for people that come to you, what is, if you were to summarize it, what are they going through, and why are they, like, what's the end goal that they want after working with you? If you could summarize it, right? Like you've probably worked with a bunch of different clients at this point, but is there a through line of what all they're seeking and then what they get after working with you?
Well, absolutely. And where my practice has evolved is, again, it's highly niched out at this point. And what I help is adventurous men who are, living large in their free time on the weekends and vacations, but in regular everyday life, they're playing small. And I help them bring that passion, that clarity, that sense of energy and lightness that they feel doing their favorite outdoor pursuits into the dinner table, into work, into their roles as a father, as a husband, as a leader of their team. So they can wake up energized, attack the day, and create, a deeper sense of fulfillment, not just success. Like Tony Robbins says, what's the point of success without fulfillment, right?
Mm.
And they come to me from several different places. Some folks are like, as I mentioned earlier, that engineer who picked the safe path. And, well, I'm good at numbers, I'm good at math, and I know there'll always be a steady job as an engineer. Like one of my guys came to me in that place. He was literally an aerospace engineer. He's like 34 years old, I want to say, when he came to me. But he's like, I hate my job. I'm totally disconnected from it. I'm good at it. It pays the bills, but I'm only like really engaged like 20% of the time. And he had this dream sitting in his back pocket to be a helicopter pilot. And several times he'd started, but he'd always talked himself out of it. Like, well, what if, all the what ifing. Like,
Hmm.
well, what if I can't get a job? And what if I can't pay my bills? And what if, this? And what if that? And he'd always find a way to contract and give up on his own dream. And so we got him aligned within himself, really connected to his purpose. And we're probably having the confidence to step up. And, at the end of the program, not only was he in flight school, and this time COVID was going on, and there was a backlog of a year to get
Mm.
into a flight school for, there's only a small number of flight schools for helicopter pilots in the country. And they skipped the line. They put him right at the front of the line. And the guy was so impressed with him, the owner of the school. He said, like, you have a job when you're finished.
That's
Like
awesome.
we had lined and he'd figured out how to go part-time at work. We helped him finding solutions where he thought there were none. So he could float, the underpaid section of that career transition doing part-time aerospace engineering. So the whole thing, the golden path suddenly was all laid out in front of him because he showed up to these challenges from a place of resourcefulness instead of I can't. The question became how. Instead of a question of like, who am I? That's not going to work for me. It's going to be like, who do I need to be? And shifting those questions around. So that's one track, is helping people get that clarity of what it is they're really meant to do and the confidence to pursue it. But a lot of other guys found themselves on the right path. They know what they're meant to do. They're doing that thing, but then somehow they've lost their way and they've lost their mojo. They've lost their swagger. It now just became like, oh, how do I get through this day? And they used to they used to be fired up and they used to have that passion. So what changed and how do we re-tap them into that person that they used to be and let them see the gift in their career and reconnect with that older, more energetic version of themselves, but tap into the wisdom that's come through all these struggles and have them fall back in love with their life, fall back in love with their career, and approach it with that newness that they had at the beginning, where I get to do this instead of I have to do my to-do list. And then from that place, that's like both of those are rising tides that lifts all the boats. They show up as a different husband, as a different father, as a different friend, and as reprioritizing a balanced, fulfilling life. So helping them step into that and discover their greatness.
Well, what I love about what you do too is that, like, again, what I find when it comes to men, we alluded to this earlier, like the men are in crisis, but I think like a lot of the problem stems from, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but it stems from like a lack of self mastery. Like it stems from a lack of having something worth striving for, or just not having a purpose anymore. And we do this thing where we go into autopilot. You get a good job. Like before I was doing this, like I was in corporate and I was decent. I was like good at it, right? Like I got to the point where I could just show up and like I was good. But then you're in autopilot and then you're not fulfilled at work. And let's face it, right? Like, and this has always been my belief, but it's like people talk about work-life balance, but like you're still you at work and you're still you in your life. So if you have to create two versions of yourself, no wonder you're fucking unhappy. Why don't you just go find a job that you could just be you at, right? But like, I just feel like, again, what I love about what you do is you're helping people come back to, I don't want to say like the good old days, but like in the old days, it was you did an apprenticeship. Again, what you did was that, like you went on an apprenticeship. You had a mentor. You probably weren't making tons of money doing it, but like you were working on a craft. You were doing a thing, and that became yours. And I don't know that men are doing that today because we go to college. That's not it's not an apprenticeship, right? Like you're not mastering anything. You're just learning a bunch of a bunch of different things. And then instead of saying, like I remember one of the most like inspirational talks I've ever gotten was from my wrestling coach in high school. And he said the biggest problem is people go to school and then they get a degree, probably one that they didn't even want, and then that degree tells them the job that they get, and then they define their entire life based on that job. Versus, why don't you start, because I went to school to be a teacher, and he was like, tell me about the life you want. And I told him this, and he's like, dude, that's like $250,000 lifestyle. And you want to be a teacher and make like at the time, like it was like 40 grand was like the average, maybe 35 was like the average. And not to mention too, of course I want to be a fucking PE teacher. Like what lives am I going to change as a PE teacher? Right. And he goes, why don't you instead start with what you want and then just figure out the career, the life that can bring you that. And of course I didn't listen until after college and do all these things. And then again, I come back to it when I'm like, 25 and I go, oh, he was onto something. But again, I think that's part of our problem, and I would argue not even just men, but people in general, is we don't start with that hard question, and arguably it's because it takes a long time. It's not easy to find your purpose. Like it takes work to figure out, like even let's bring it to not so much lifestyle, but even like business. It takes a long time and a lot of effort to find your brand, to find who to talk to and what makes you different. That takes a long time, but there's also a lot that comes out of doing that. But I think when it comes to living life, it's the same way. Like, if you spend the time to find your thing, this is my skill set, this is my purpose, right? Whether it's like to guide others to a certain success, or to decode success for others, or to guide them to their inner happiness, whatever that thing is, right? Once you find it, then you have purpose. But again, I think part of the issue with men today is that there's no mastery. There's hacks. There's fucking flaunt a watch here, buy that. Like, there's no inner mastery happening anymore, except for people like you that are like, yo, you're missing a huge part of life.
Yeah, and that's so huge. I love what you're saying, Raylan. That's so powerful. It's because, it's, like you say at the beginning of your comment, it starts with that lack of self-knowledge. Like, if you don't know who you are, if you're not a master of your own inner world, if you're not solidly standing on your own 2 feet, the world is just going to blow you around. And there's so much temptation. There's so much, imagery being sent at us, so much programming. I think about where I grew up in the suburbs of Connecticut. Like, you know, there was nobody living a life like Mike. Like I talked about at the beginning, the solar, and globe-trotting solar nomad who's devoting his whole life to that. Like, there was nobody living their passion in that way. And that was, and so in a lack of clarity about who we are and what really fuels us, these external influences we'll just say, well, that sounds good. And we order off a limited menu
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying, wait a minute, like, that's not the complete menu. If I don't like this, I'm at the Chinese restaurant. I don't want that. I can go to Indian. And if I don't like that, I can order off the menu. I can just tell the chef what I want. I get to create any life that I want. And until you're clear, but most of us are existing in that, it's like a whiteout or a mist, like driving in a fog bank. We don't even know what we want. So then we don't take confident action towards it. And then how do we operate when we're in a mist? It's very, if you're driving through a mist, how do you drive, right, Raylan? How do you
Yeah.
drive when you're driving through a mist?
You hope you have some fog lights or some shit, or you just pull over and wait.
Yeah, you pull over and wait, you stay
Yeah.
stuck. Or if you do drive, you slow down to like 20 miles an hour, right? And you're death gripping the steering wheel. you know, it's so much what I do is just lifting the mist and helping people see, wait a minute, like here's where you want to go. It's an open highway, man. Let's put the floor down
Mm-hmm.
on the accelerator and go 80 miles an hour, light and carefree, and get you to the place you really want to be. But until you've done that inner work, you don't even know where you want to go. And in often lacking direction, speed becomes the utmost importance. So we just bounce around from thing to thing to thing
Yeah.
without that inner clarity. And then we look back and we go, what the hell did we do? We wasted all this time.
That's why still to this day, like it's one of those the most like an important questions to ask yourself, right? Which is, and what I usually ask clients is, what do you want? Like even on the agency side, right? Like we do marketing, which is like boring, to some, but even that, it's like, what do you want? Well, I don't know. Well, that's like if you don't know what you want, the universe is going to hand you a plate of just random shit in hopes that you're creating still. You're just not creating what you want because you don't know what the hell you want. So it's like I'm thankful for people like you that's out there because you're helping people figure out what they want. But man, that was it for today, dude. That was an awesome episode, dude. I really appreciate the stories and I think most importantly to me is that I don't think you have to go through like a life, like you don't have to almost lose your life to have that gratitude. And it's a great thing that you're doing out there, man. It's helping people. So I appreciate everything you do, and most importantly, thanks for coming to the podcast, dude. This was fun.
Yeah, Raylan, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and what you're doing out there too. Like your messaging is spot on and inspiring. Like I feel very privileged to be positioned where we are at this time and how our field is exploding because people are realizing the value in not trying to solve these problems on their own. And this next wave of coaches right out in the world, we're going to change the world. And I'm so
Yep.
lucky that we're in the right place, right time, spreading the right message. So thank you for being a part of this change, the sea change that's going on.